the idea of this is it's about something outside of Joomla itself, but something a lot of people forget to consider, which is actually where's your Joomla site going to go once you've finished creating it. So you've done a kick-ass template, you've done a bundled development, put all your extensions together, custom development, whatever you've done. And for a lot of people, that then gets chucked on a shared hosting environment. And for most people, that's probably okay. It's also a remnant of the fact that for a long time, anything other than shared hosting was prohibitively expensive. Nowadays, newer technologies, there's other things you can do, and the idea from this is to think about outside that standard shared hosting box that we're all so used to, and have a look at some of the other things that you could be doing that will actually benefit your site, not cost you an arm and a leg. And the idea being that maybe after you leave here today, you might investigate these further, and you may or may not choose that they are actually something that's viable for what you're doing. I should have gone back. My background, I have a small web consultancy in Perth doing, I mainly do work for creative agencies, so where they need the technical stuff, that's where we come in. I also work for Timble, which is Johan Janssens, who's not had much to do officially with Joomla for a long time, but he's behind Document, Nuku Framework, a few other things to work with him. And along with Brian, many years ago, I was accidentally one of the founders of Joomla, and it was more a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's quite by accident. So anyway, the idea here is that we can make Joomla rock on a budget. It's an old saying, and it's something which I picked up in a previous life when I worked in hardware solutions and Windows networks and stuff, which was fast, cheap or good. You can have any two, but you can't have all three. So you could have a fast and cheap machine, but it's probably crap. You could have a cheap and good machine, but it probably won't be very fast. You could only ever get two of them. You couldn't get all three. And it's been that way with hosting as well, but it's starting to change. One of the things that got me on this path in the first place was a few years ago, Google themselves started harping on a lot about speed of sites. It was starting to make its way into how they ranked your site. And at that time, I, like many, many other people in the Joomla community, was actually using Rock and shared hosting. I know lots of other people who are doing the same. Rock and other people who actually do the Joomla hosting of the Joomla sites. I knew Chris, who owns Rockin', so I'd been using them for probably 5 years, never questioned it. But this made me question it, because with Rockin' we were using servers that were outside of Australia, so for Australian users, sometimes they weren't all that fast. At that time I was living in Albany, WA. Albany is a small coastal town on the south coast of Western Australia. I was doing all I did on a 28k dial-up. Speed was something I didn't have. And so I wanted speed. It didn't take much to impress me, because on a 28k dial-up, anything was better. But when this stuff started to come, people like Matt Cutts, people who do SEO would be familiar with him from Google, they started mentioning speed a lot. And then this was an official announcement that Google said that they were actually going to incorporate it into the algorithm. So all of a sudden, speed became a part of what was determining where your site came up. I'm not an SEO expert. I don't know how to do a lot of the mechanical things that SEO experts do, but this was something I could do. I could make sites faster. The considerations I had at the time were the cost. I couldn't do something that was going to cost an arm and a leg. I wasn't a major international corporate with unlimited funds. The cost was a reality I lived with. Reliability was something else I needed. I'd been used to Rockin', which up until then had never had any major problems in terms of reliability. It was a robust system. I wanted some flexibility. I was doing lots of client sites, had different requirements for each, and I wanted to be able to maybe offer different solutions for each. Performance, which is where it all started. Administration. I'm actually a system admin originally, before I got more into code, which is what I do these days. I was a sysadmin. I was actually a Windows sysadmin. Support, redundancy and backup. So these are sort of related. They related to how much time I was actually going to have to spend looking after what was going on. In looking at all these things, I was comparing them to what I was using at the time, which was your normal LAMP stack. So LAMP stack's what most of you probably are using, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL and PHP. That's been the stack that's been used for Joomla since its inception, almost as a standard, until the last few years. Likewise, if you're using any other major PHP platform from the last 10 years, if you go to if anyone's old enough to know PHP Nuke or Post Nuke or any of those, they were all built and developed using these for years and years and years. And it was a good, robust system. It was well supported. There was a huge install base, so there was a lot of user experience there, so you could get online and find the answer to most things fairly quickly. Flexibility was a bit hard because it was generally in a shared hosting environment. There was no flexibility. The setup you had was the setup you had, same as everyone else. Shared hosts weren't about to start doing custom stuff for you. You could do some things sometimes through htaccess, but quite often not even that. There was no scalability at all in a shared hosting environment. And security, there was different factors. Depending on who your host was, you had different levels of security. But there was also the fact that regardless of how much security there was, if another site on the same physical machine as yours was going down, was causing stress to the server, then all the sites went down. So in looking around, I actually tried a few of the new web servers. Was the first place I started. And I started, cloud computing was just starting to come out as something that was feasible. Rackspace had just brought out their cloud, which was actually Mozo beforehand. And it was at a price point that wasn't actually prohibitive anymore. You could get yourself, and you still can get yourself a cloud server for about $15 a month. So it's not a huge cost, and if your business is built around a web presence, then it's really an incidental cost. So I had my cloud server that I could play around with. I had to start looking at the stack from the ground up, and I started playing around with all the different bits and pieces that go towards making the stack. Starting with the actual flavour of Linux. I'm a Windows admin originally, and I don't believe Windows has any place serving PHP content, or it didn't at that point. They've made some changes now which makes it better. I looked at the actual web server itself. Apache had been the norm. I looked at things like Lite and Nginx, and I benchmarked them and I tried them. I wasn't just looking at speed at that point. I was also looking at how easily I could actually administer these systems. I looked at MySQL and the different flavors. MySQL at this point had been taken over and moved on to Oracle, and there was a little bit of no one really knew what was going on at that point. And I got put onto Bacona, which is actually MySQL. It's just an enterprise version of it, brought out by a commercial company. They provide commercial support, and they've done some modifications that basically allow it to run faster, more efficiently, so it's using less system resources. PHP, I had a look and looked at what I could do there, and we came up with PHP 5 FPM. FPM is Fast Process Manager, which has actually been around in some form since 2004, and as of PHP 5.3, it's actually incorporated in the install. And I'll go into that in a bit more. I dropped the idea of having mail on a server at all. Something which came from my Windows days working with large corporates was that each Windows server had a single purpose, and it did one thing, and it only did that one thing. You never would have a SharePoint server also running your Exchange. Single-purpose servers meant that no two core functionalities could ever go down at the same time normally. And so taking that, I wanted my web servers to be web servers and just web servers. I didn't want to be hosting mail for clients on them. I didn't want to be hosting mailing lists on them. I wanted them to do nothing more than serve web pages, and that was it. And so for that purpose, Exim's there. Exim's a lightweight mail transport software. So it's not actually allowing the servers to bring in mail, it's just allowing them to send it. It's providing basically a mechanism for SMTP to go out. I also had a look at the actual flavors of Linux, and what I found, coming from a Windows background, I wasn't quite sure what to use. I ended up settling on Debian and Ubuntu. I found that Debian is a bit more stable than Ubuntu. They tend to err on caution and not bring in the latest versions of everything. So what you get in a Debian distribution is going to be slightly more proven. Ubuntu is a little bit more cutting edge, and so I wanted to be safe. I didn't want to spend time fixing bugs and doing things like that. So I opted for Debian myself, but that said, if you look around on the web, you'll see advocates of CentOS, Red Hat Cloud Linux, which is all purpose-built for the cloud. My best advice there ended up being go with whatever you're comfortable with, because most of the major distributions have fairly large communities of people doing the web side of things. There's plenty of help there, and there's also a surprisingly large number of fully qualified people on all the platforms, not just the majors like Red Hat, which are very high profile. Okay, so then we got to Nginx. Nginx is actually now the second most used web server in the world. So it's overtaken IIS last year. It's now used a lot by large companies, likes of a lot of your major platforms that you hear about are actually using it now. Sometimes as a reverse proxy, so your actual HTTP requests go to Nginx and it's then going through to Apache. I don't actually do that, I just run Nginx on itself. And it's not in here, but we've done some changes to how Joomla works so that we can actually get it running with Varnish, which is adding some extra speed. Nginx is lightweight. By design, it's not like Apache, which has a ton of modules, and in a shared environment, there'll be a ton of modules getting loaded with Apache. The idea with Nginx is do one thing, do it well, very lightweight, low resource usage, so it's not using a lot of RAM, not really using a lot of CPU most of the time. And that in itself became part of an ongoing theme of low resource usage, which allowed it to sit on a cloud server very nicely, and a low-cost cloud server as well. Nginx itself, the architecture is quite different to Apache. It's event-driven. Basically, the way it actually triggers the process when it's getting the requests in is quite different to the way Apache does it. And it allows it to run more concurrent processes than what Apache can. It doesn't create the same sort of tunnel where everything's going through the same place. And that allows it to basically get stuff in and out very quickly. It's exceedingly fast for serving static files as well. So even if you just use that on its own as a, not a CDN, but a place for your static files to sit, it can actually then help your web server.
Did you look at Lightspeed?
Yep. Lightspeed I actually really liked. The only reason I didn't, in fact, it was the two that I got the best benchmarks ended up being Lighty and Nginx, having tried Lightspeed as well. And the reason I went with Nginx over Lighty ended up being simply an administration thing. I found the configuration for it to be easier.
Would you say Lightspeed is better than Netty?
Not having used Lightspeed enough, other than those initial trials, I wouldn't venture to say. I think benchmark-wise, it was definitely outperforming it. And there's plenty of literature on the web that you'll find that people have done the benchmarks and found it to be faster. It was close. A lot of it just came to personal opinion as well. I just felt more comfortable in the Nginx environment. With Lighty, I was having to use Lua scripts a little bit to accomplish some bits and pieces. I don't think they have to do that so much now, but that just meant there was another scripting language I was having to bring into the mix as well, which was a minor but unwanted complication as well. Nginx, I don't know if anyone who's used it, but the configuration files are dead simple. Really, really simple.
One question. You said something about static files going quicker because they're not dynamic, and those websites you've got there are dynamic on the benchmark. What do you think a static website would?
To be honest, I've never actually tried that, so I couldn't tell you.
The other day, once I build a website, it's common that I don't actually need it to dynamically create pages. So I was thinking of
some of the stats that you will find if you Google it, in the reverse proxy environment, the reason people do that is actually they'll still, partly because they've already got Apache sitting there and they don't want to sort of destroy that setup. But the way they configure that normally is that Nginx will serve the static files directly and just pass the dynamic content, so the PHP derived content, through to Apache, which will then do its bit and send it back through again. And the anecdotal evidence from that, and I didn't actually try this myself, was always quite positive in terms of speed improvements that you're getting from it.
So it actually passes the CGI process back to Apache. That's interesting because Apache is way better for handling static than it is for handling the CGI thing. You know, is that
Yeah.
related add-on to it?
Yeah, I'm a,
Interesting. I didn't know, I haven't played much with Nginx, so.
yeah, I'm a,
Yeah.
Nginx, to give you an example, we, in our own hosting, we're doing a lot of hosting with this now. In the last 6 months, we've started doing it commercially, whereas before that, we were sort of feeling which way we wanted to go. We have purely, so it's an upsell. So we've got a Plesk 11 now. It provides, Apache is still the core HTTP server or for the dynamic content, but they have an option which we use, which was to stick Nginx in front as a reverse proxy to it. So Nginx is delivering the static contents directly. It's only in Plesk 11. We did it more of a marketing reason because we're pushing this the cloud-based dedicated cloud servers, but this is a nice stepping stone for those people that we get in there, and then down the track they'll grow into that. But we are, what has kind of surprised me, it kind of goes a little bit to what you're talking about. We're actually then running that Plesk on a cloud server, and we started off, we were going with quite a high spec cloud server, and we've actually been able to drop it down quite dramatically because it hasn't actually been using the kind of resources that we would have been using, say, in a VPS environment. And we haven't benchmarked it, but we've been able to do this without any major hindrance. Our next step is actually going to be, now that Rackspace has a presence in Sydney, we're actually going to be moving things because they're in the US now, but back here. But we did that, and it has made a difference. It wasn't intentional. We did it for a marketing reason, but it's turned out to be beneficial.
So you're using, in a sense, Nginx the way you use Varnish?
So, yeah, although we can now
I don't generally put Varnish there, but I've never thought of it.
well, we actually are using. We're constantly experimenting. Another thing we're looking at now is also running Nginx and Varnish. So Nginx is doing the static content, and Varnish is essentially caching the dynamic content. We're playing with that. We're also playing with something which I haven't got working yet, and I mentioned it actually in Sydney. I think you're in Sydney, and I was playing with it then. I still haven't got it working, but we're actually looking at using caching at a Joomla level, but then having Nginx access it directly without initiating PHP process. So, well, no, it actually works. The problem we've got at the moment is telling it when to do it, and we can't do it with the stock standard Joomla. We have to hack it too much to make it viable, because what we're trying to do is tell Joomla what the logic of it is that we tell Joomla that every time there's a change in Joomla, recache that change. So we always have a full and fresh cache. At the moment, the logic is that after a certain period of time, the cache dies and it gets refreshed. We've just thrown that aside and said that Joomla knows when there's a change to logic. Create the cache in and then leave it there forever until there's another change. If that makes sense. Sorry? Not at an ops code level. But then what we can then do is have Nginx actually access that cache directly. So it doesn't touch Joomla, it doesn't touch a PHP process. It basically treats it like more static content and just sends it straight out again. We've got it working, but not to a point where you could just run it on any site, because we've had to hack the bits out, hack Joomla to shreds to make it work. It's not viable for general use.
To give you an example, any of the Drupal high-performance stats are doing the same thing. They're running a distribution.
Yeah.
Platform.
Yeah. I actually took some inspiration from there. I'm constantly looking at what everyone else is doing and stealing ideas and then pretending they're mine. Next thing was MySQL, which I mentioned Picona. Picona, when you run Picona, it is MySQL, so don't be worried that you're running something that isn't MySQL. It is MySQL with some additional libraries or modules that actually allow it to perform better and with lower resource usage. Better scalability. There's less chance of sharding. And we've found that it can actually run much better logging as part of, because it's for a corporate environment. Corporates like to log everything. They like to know everything that's going on and be able to go back to any specific point in time. They've increased the amount of logging, which actually helps because it allows us to diagnose problems easier. A good point being, it's actually something we were talking about K2, we had a site in WA, SciTech. It's kind of, I don't know if it's something in Melbourne, but in Sydney it's like the Powerhouse Museum, so it's a sort of hands-on kids sciencey type thing. They had a website which had called Science Network WA, and it's quite a big site, loads and loads and loads of content, all running on K2, but they were on Windows Server as well, but it was taking 28 seconds for a page load. Even on a 28K modem, I didn't used to get that bad. And we actually were able to, we put them onto a cloud server using basically the stack here. We got it down to, that alone brought it straight away down to probably 15 to 18 seconds. But then we were able to use the login features in here to actually diagnose it. We knew the problem was probably in the MySQL, but we were able to really pinpoint where we needed to make changes through the advanced logging that's done. It was really brilliant. How did I do that? I don't even know how I did that, but sorry, new computer, still getting used to it. This is Percona's own benchmarks, but basically 40% faster in overall throughput. Checkpointing is a process that MySQL does periodically to make sure, basically to stop it from falling over. And each time it does it, you basically have a dead period and its ability to process. And Percona, through modified way of processing things, it basically doesn't have that. In small sites, that's not ever going to affect you terribly much, but if you did have a high volume site, then you would notice the difference there. How I came across it was I was looking at, I've got this theory that you look at what the big companies are doing, and they've got big IT budgets and departments, and they can invest, and they do invest weeks, months, a year in determining what product to use before they use it. I don't have that type of investment capability and all the time to do it, but if I copy what they do, then I'm getting the benefit of what they've done in terms of their investment. So in terms of Percona, the reason I came across, I was looking at what other people are doing. And if you look at people like Tumblr and Etsy and so forth, these are high volume sites and they're running on Percona, and there had to be a reason why they're doing it. And so that's why I started looking at what it was doing. So Fast CGI Process Manager. So this is PHP Fast FPM. Adaptive process spawning, so it can basically, again, it basically allows it to create new PHP processes on the fly as it requires, something which previously it couldn't do. It has a graceful start and stop. It's each worker, so you can have multiple workers, and each one can be independently configured with its own little set of specifics as to how you want to do it. In general, you wouldn't use that, but on larger sites, that can be quite useful. And another little tip was that, and this was a real simple thing, traditionally you would configure Nginx to pass through to PHP via a TCP/IP throughput. Simply changing that to sockets instantly gave you a 10 to 15% performance boost. And it's it's 2 lines of code. One in how PHP, basically one to tell PHP to listen on the socket and one to tell Nginx to send it to the socket. And that was a big tip. That really helped a lot. Exim. So you use this where you might use previously postfix or something like that. This is simply a mail transport, nothing else. It's useful to have it if you can have any sort of outgoing emails from your stack. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it there.
Sorry, is that the same sockets that was used before, like in bulletin boards at times? Like Winstocks?
Not really, no. It's a little bit different. It's kind of like you're right. TCP/IP is a protocol, and in the protocol there's what's called the OSI layers.
Sorry, I didn't want to distract you.
Yeah, no, it's basically the OSI layers are a set of features of each packet of information in TCP/IP, and basically it goes through a whole process of each one of those layers where it kind of gets decrypted, looked at, a decision's made, and it goes on to the next one. And that takes time. And that's on every little packet of information that goes through. And that, each time it does that, it's taking a little bit of time. And if you multiply that by the thousands of packets that's going through, it takes time. You're on the same machine. You don't have to use that. You don't have to use what is essentially a network connection to do it. Using its sockets, you're basically going from within the machine to within the machine and bypassing this whole sort of what is really should be an external process. So the speed increase actually comes from bypassing this whole sort of how packets go from one Ethernet adapter to another, essentially. Not that they're going through one. Okay, so those were our three major things. So we had our web server, we had our database, and we had PHP. And they're all slight differences. None of them were huge, but each one gave a little bit of better performance in terms of speed and ability, but also gave us a slight reduction in the resource usage on the machine. So then we had a look at the actual servers. Now, up until then, as I mentioned, I'd been using Rackspace. We actually had a VPS server there running cPanel, whole works. I'm sure lots and lots of people do that kind of thing. We were toying with the idea of dedicated servers. We had the internal NAS to be able to run dedicated servers. But for us, the prohibiting factor there was basically in Australia the cost of having them and the bandwidth costs and stuff like that, that you need to get a wholesale account that costs tons and tons of cash up front, regardless of how many clients you got using it. It was just ridiculous. So it made no sense to us. And because we sort of kicked off with cloud servers in the first place, we sort of became a little bit biased and basically just went down the cloud server route. Cloud servers, well, firstly, what is it? Cloud servers is a fairly arbitrary term that if you ask different people, there's always a different answer. And I've actually got an answer to something that was said in Sydney, which was one person did a presentation there, and they actually came up with the idea that cloud computing was basically utility computing. And there was something wrong with that at the time in my mind. A lot of people thought it was a good idea. It's kind of explained it. And I couldn't resolve that in myself. And later on, when it was no longer relevant, I worked out why. And it was because the idea of utility billing, which is basically you get charged by the bandwidth or the CPU or the memory usage, that's not what cloud computing is. That's the business model by which you charge it. And if you look at Microsoft and various vendors, going back to Lotus Notes, used to be charged on a per CPU basis when you put it on servers. That's utility billing. It's not utility computing. Cloud computing is much simpler than that. It's basically the pooling of computer resources. It's been around for a long time. Some of you may have heard NASA's done it, Berkeley did it, which is SETI, BOINC, where they were encouraging people to download a little bit of software you ran on your home computer, and when your computer was not in use, it allowed them to use it to run large or calculations that were helping them with astronomy calculations, massive amounts, where if they could get thousands of people around the world to do this, they were getting the power of all those computers. And that was essentially the beginnings, in some ways, of grid computing, which is essentially where cloud computing came from. In fact, in looking at these facts, I was actually reading through some of their forums, and actually themselves came up with the realization fairly recently that in actual fact, they had cloud computing way before anyone had actually called it cloud computing. So it's been around a long time. More recently, and in our world, which is a web hosting world, you've got things like Eucalyptus and OpenStack, which are quite common. OpenStack's what Rackspace do. They teamed up with NASA, made their platform open source. It's now got, it's a who's who of tech companies involved now. So my take on cloud computing is basically the pooled resources of computers. What that actually gives you in terms of benefits is that you can obviously you have literally physically you have a whole bundle of servers. You have a virtualized instance which is physically sitting on one of those servers, but it's getting to use CPU power, memory, or maybe space from other parts of that pooled resources. And what that also allows it to do is to scale instantly. And where that happens is that if you, to use an old term, who knows what /dotting is? Remember that term? Happened to Joomla when we first started. Brian will remember the site went down twice, when we announced the name and when we announced the logo, I think. and the Joomla site just got wiped out, and it was because it had been Slashdot. Slashdotting was Slashdot, someone posted on there, and then all the geeks of the world all went there at once, because they're all watching it in real time. Now that was sitting on a single dedicated server. It had nowhere to go. Once it got too many people, it died. And poor old guys at Rockin', they could reboot it, but it just died again because it would be revisited by all those people who've been trying to get on it. With cloud computing, you have elasticity. So you've got that big pool of resources, and the idea is that if your instance gets hit with a Slashdot or something like that, it can instantly, providing it's configured to allow it, grab some more memory, grab some more CPU.
Yeah, except a lot of cloud services, I mean, that's the theory. But the billing model, what the cloud
True.
services operate on, is that they won't elastically grow unless you click the button to make it grow.
Yeah, most.
So like, for example, the Microsoft Azure system, yeah, it's a by design feature of theirs that it will not elasticize.
It is now.
Right, until you press the button.
True. That's true, but what's also happening is that most of the larger vendors like Rackspace and Amazon also allow you to have instances that you pay a little bit more for that already have that button clicked. And the other thing is that in those instances we're talking about using other vendors to do it, there is also the option to run it yourself, and it's something which we're actually quite seriously looking at as a medium-term goal, is actually to have an OpenStack cloud of our own in Australia, which initially we would probably employ Rackspace to set up for us. We're just in a position now where we're treading water, getting the quantity of customers that would actually make that viable. In which case we can do whatever we want. And we're talking from inside. We're industry insiders here. Well, I'm assuming we are, rather than people looking in or who have a site who are looking for hosting. We're the people doing the hosting, or at least helping.
So are you looking to do setting us up specifically for Joomla, or any?
Well, this is the thing which we'll be launching very shortly. Is has anyone here used a cloud server before? Okay, so you know you have flavors, so you can pick a flavor, and generally your flavor is just a raw version of Ubuntu or Debian or something like that. We've spent the last 6 or 7 months building, initially, well, we've got a Joomla done. We built our stack, which we now maintain that stack. We then have a Joomla-fied version, so it's basically got Joomla on the stack already, so when you deploy the cloud server, it's already got Joomla there already set to go. And we did a few small tweaks, particularly in SQL and stuff like that, to make it run a little bit better. And we're looking to do the same possibly with Drupal, and probably won't do WordPress because it's kind of covered already. The main reason we're trying to do it locally actually is to do with legal reasons. Here in Australia, at least, if you're using Amazon based in the States or you're using Rackspace in the States, you've got problems with the Patriot Act, for example. And so as we get to larger clients, they don't want US-based servers anymore. They want something that's here where the data's here and stuff like that. So the market's there. We're just personally getting to economies of scale first.
This is the ignorance question from being from the UK to Australia. If your client base is in Australia and your servers are in the US, is there a latency issue?
There is a little bit.
I'm asking if there's a UK going to the US.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. We were, to give you an example, in Perth, so west coast of Australia, before we went to Rockin', we were using a company called Host for Web, who were based in Chicago. Brilliant, technically brilliant, great customer service, good product. We're more than happy with them, except it was slow. We then moved to Dallas-based servers, so if you imagine there's a little invisible line there somewhere, instantly fixed. It was actually with the same company. They happen to have data centers in both. So it depends. Yeah. See, I think we go out through Singapore, which is a major hub, and then probably go west. No, that can't be right because we're better on the. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, you're going east to hit West Coast America.
Yeah, I've confused myself now. It was better on the. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it depends on the routing at the time as well. You go through Telstra, you could end up anywhere. I've done basically traceroute on gone through different countries. I've had stuff that I was tracing through to the States, and sometimes it's gone through New Zealand, and sometimes it's gone through Singapore. I'm like, why is it going to New Zealand? It only comes back again. So who knows?
Well, the routes are dynamic, so the switches will send the packets wherever they see them displayed. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, but if you're going to a dead end and you've only got to turn around and come back again, that was a bit of a waste. The Pacific data cable hasn't got ground; it's never going up. So.
So with the actual, sorry if I'm, but I was just wondering, with the actual stack that you're talking about is created, that particular stack, are you going to just be running it on your cloud service? Would you offer it as like a virtual appliance for people to run if they want to run it in a different cloud?
Because we're using OpenStack at the moment, OpenStack's OpenStack based. Yeah. But that's only because OpenStack is it's not proprietary, but it's kind of its own little thing. It's not a transportable image. So I might potentially down the track we might open it so people could use it on other OpenStack. I will talk a lot about OpenStack because that's what we've ended up going with. There are Eucalyptus and there are other just as good cloud platforms. It was just that we were already using that Rackspace when they did this, so it kind of made sense just to keep going. And now we're so deep into it we can't get out, so we're stuck there. But yeah, cloud services actually was the starting point of all this, and it's something which I'd actually advocate, not necessarily with OpenStack. We're starting to use Amazon a little bit as well, just to play around and tinker, because OpenStack stroke Rackspace is easier. Amazon and then the plethora of products that they have within their cloud is far more configurable, dare I say, powerful in terms of what you could do with it. But I think that also goes to do with the age. OpenStack's much younger than Amazon's cloud services. And then there's also, if you're outside of PHP, you've got things like Google App Engine, although I'm not sure if they've still got that open for new stuff. I'm not sure, but there'll be more around as well. But that was where we started with, was that we were looking for, and this is all cost effective, and the idea here is don't necessarily go with what we're saying, but to encourage you to have a look into it. Fast, cheap, good, back where we began, that's just a little matrix. It gives you a rough idea based on what we learnt. You're getting close, we are getting close both with VPS and cloud service to something that is both cheap, good and fast. It is almost possible. Closing thoughts, and this was something I touched on earlier. If you've spent $5, $10, $15, $20, $100,000 on the site in terms of development, front-end development, back-end development, design, all that, it makes no sense whatsoever to set up on a crappy hosting platform. And I've seen that happen so often. Customers who will spend 10 grand on a website but then won't spend $10 on hosting it each month. It seems ludicrous to me. Judge each site on its merits. Not all sites need what I've been talking about. A small business card site that gets one person a day doesn't need it. You can't fudge server administrator. If you're not an administrator, don't try and be an administrator. Admit what you can't do and hire someone to do it. We learned that earlier on as well. We're Windows administrators, we weren't Linux administrators. We hired the people we needed for Linux. There's lots of good resources. Web Hosting Talk was a good starting point for us. The Whirlpool forums, which are the Australian forums, were also a good point. But we also learnt early on is that just because you heard it there doesn't make it true. Particularly on both cases, but particularly Web Hosting Talk, there tended to be a lot of marketing in there from various self-interested parties as there was actual factual help. And that's it. So basically, the idea there was to just give consideration to some of these other things. Maybe none of this was hard. You can play around in your own cloud server, get it started, $15 a month. You can play it, you break it, you destroy it, and you create a new one. And you just keep doing that, and you get more familiar with it. You learn the tricks. And nowadays, when we started doing this was about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot less information on the web than there is now. The web being what it is, nowadays you can basically get pretty good step-by-step guides for all of this stuff. and then you just need to tinker around the edges and learn as you go. But yeah, give it a go, have a play, and see how you go. I
But
think
then what about you've got security issues then that difficult to deal with without special knowledge, isn't it?
we covered it in two ways. Firstly, we do have one or two experts. There's where I said you can't fudge administration, so we hired people on contract basis who we call in when we need to. But we also took a less is more approach. So, and this is one of the things with Apache. The more, and it comes from Windows, the more stuff you put on there, the more possible windows of security breach that there are. That's why we only have basically 4 or 3 core elements plus Exum, and that's it. There's nothing else on there. We have absolutely nothing else on there. If you think about, you look at a typical cPanel server and the amount of modules that have been added into it to suit, because that's a one-size-fits-all solution, and to do that, they have to put stuff that will suit you, something for you, something for you, something for you. Yeah, with this plethora of stuff that you might only be using 10% of what's actually available there, those are all potential security problems. So we took a less is more. The less you have on there, the less chance. And it doesn't mean that you can't have problems, and it doesn't mean that you don't do, normal backup procedures. And with backups, I might also add that you actually test your backups and make sure they're restored periodically. I've seen companies who, we back up every night. They've been doing that for 5 years, and then when it falls down, whoop-de-doo, their backups didn't actually restore. They never tried it. And I've seen that I've actually seen that a long time ago in a Windows environment actually bankrupt a business. So
if you effectively build a hard cloud service, what does your average customer use for administration? Just so I can account administration.
Well, to give you an idea of what we're doing, our approach with our cloud service, this is just us, and other companies do it differently, but our customers have absolutely no technical exposure to the server. We don't offer that. If you want to be able to get in at a command line level, or anything beyond basically a Joomla interface, if you want any of that, go somewhere else. We're not interested in dealing with you. We're not hosting email accounts. It's not an email server we're providing. We're providing a web server. That's it. We don't. If you came to us, sorry, Plesk. Yeah, Plesk we do, but that's not our dedicated cloud server. If Plesk is merely a marketing tool to get people into our business, to then down the track as they grow, we move them over to the dedicated cloud service. Yep. No. I'm around for a little while if anyone wants questions outside.